slides maybe at the end of next week, so you can maybe catch up. All right, so last class, we talked about the brain and behavior, so we kind of investigated the neurons, how that all works, how they communicate, send electrical, chemical signals to the brain, right? How we build neural networks so we can be more creative and think more powerfully, how the brain communicates with the body, with the nervous systems, sympathetic, parasympathetic, movements, pain, sensation, perception. But now, moving on, we're talking about human development, right? Kind of developmental psychology. Who here is one for nursing? Right? So at some point, you'll have to take developmental psychology. Any of you ever take that? You took development, right?
Wait, what?
Developmental psychology? Yeah, so you'll have to take that, right? And why is that important for a nurse? Well, you're going to be dealing with different types of patients who are in different age groups. And will come with different age groups, new challenges, right? We're all not facing the same challenges physically, right? Cognitively, how we think, or even social, emotional, our interactions and relationships with people, right? It differs from infant to toddler to adolescence to early adulthood, middle adulthood, right? All the way to death, right? And even beyond, even before the prenatal, while you're in mom's womb, we're still being developed. There's some environmental things there. So this is kind of what we start off with, right? Developmental psychology, human development. What we're looking at is study progressive changes in behavior and abilities involved in every stage of life. I would say before conception, well, from conception to death, from the womb to the tomb, right? You are in your own unique stage of development, which means usually with people your age group, you have your own unique challenges. Your challenges might be different than my challenges because I'm in a different age group, right? Physically, cognitively, social, emotional relationships, right? So you're like, hey, your challenge may be like, hey, maybe you want more money. It might be a financial challenge. Maybe you're not uncertain about where your future is headed. You know? Maybe you have any issues with living situations. Maybe it's independence. You're like, I don't want to get out of mom and dad's house. I don't have the money. I got to stay there. They got to treat me like a child and an adult. Right? So you might be in a very unique situation from a developmental point of view. Shaped by continuous interaction between nature and nurture. Remember you had the discussion, it was like, hey, what's more powerful, your nature, your genetics that you, that were inherited from your mom and your dad, right? If you were genetic code, or was it your environment, hey, how they raised you, right? What schools you went to, or the relationships with them. We'll talk about that with attachment theory and emotional kind of theories, right? The consensus is that both of them matter a lot, right? Your genetics obviously shape who you are in terms of how you look. Your hair color, your texture, eye color, height, all these different things are genetic. So that's nature. They're important, right? Because they probably link to some of your behavior. And then your environment is equally important. So if you like, hey, the environment can also shape your nature too. So think about this, human being, you yourself are no different than any organism on the planet. Every organism lives in an environment that's usually adaptable for them to survive. And that organism is shaped by it. It means there's actual change that's happening to that organism because of the environment. But here's the other thing, that organism shapes the environment. You know, the environment shaping them, making changes so that they can survive and adapt and evolve, right? And they're also shaping the environment. How do we know this? We talked about MRIs and EKG, well not EKGs, EEGs and things like that. All these different techniques to look at the brain. But one thing we could do is take an electroencephalograph, which is EEG, but we can measure electrical activity even outside of your body. So say for example, like, man, I saw that person's aura. What do you mean that aura? Right? So these are real things, right? Which makes it fascinating. It makes it interesting that you know, maybe want to investigate and learn more about this, right? We're also excreting other things. You're like, well, we excrete pheromones. Pheromones aren't visible. They're essentially kind of hormones outside the body. So people are like, hey, why did those two people get together? They look like they should never be together. What happened? Like, well, you know, we do have a field of energy, and we also have chemicals, literally hormones outside the body that people are taking up in their nasal receptors. In their nasal receptors, in order to say, man, I'm gravitating towards the person before I reject this. You're giving off information, right? And when I think about it, because it's just very unconscious most of the time, you're like, you give off information to me, whether you like it or not. You give off information back. It's this life, which means you change your environment too. It's not just environment changing you, evolution changes over time. You are changing the environment. You change the world. There's a bunch of different energies in here, right? So think about that. And so as we kind of explore developmental psychology, like, hey, we do want to pay attention to all of it, the environment and the genetics. Okay, heredity, nature, going back to the genes. We say genetic transmission via genes of physical and psychological characteristics, parents and children, right? You're getting 23 segments of DNA, chromosomes for mom and for dad, that genetic code, like a computer program code. You have instructions on what eye color to give you, what hair texture, how tall you're going to be, all these different things. Right? You say, hey, I may have more of mom, a dominant gene for mom, so I took one of mom's traits, genetic traits. Maybe I got more of dad, so I look like dad or something. What do you think? Raise your hand if you look more like dad than mom. Raise your hand if you look more like a mom. So you look like a picture. Right? And so we'll talk about dominant and recessive genes. Like some of those genes, they're competing. One is going to be dominant and express itself. The other one will be recessive and don't express itself. They're there. They just get beat out by the dominant gene. Hopefully we're all familiar with DNA, with the double helix, right? Contains the genes, the genetic information. All right, the influence of heredity, right? Genes, they're small segments of strands of DNA that carry hereditary information. There's a dominant gene. The gene's feature will appear each time the gene is present. So that gene will express itself, right? It'll manifest. And then that recessive gene, the gene's feature will appear only if it's paired with another recessive gene. So you need two recessive genes in order for it to express itself. But still, only 1/4 of the time, 25%, there's a chance that it will be expressed. Usually dominant genes win out. So for example, mom and dad both can have recessive genes, right? And if they pair together, they'll express potential. You know what kind of mean from dominant and recessive? A lot of it has to do with nature kind of would prescribe that you need for survival, for you to survive. Maybe this is appropriate. So think about it. We all come from a long history of lineage. Wherever your ancestors come from, immediate ancestors, right? You might keep expressing those genes until now you've changed your environment for so long, your children, your grandchildren, like, hey, that gene went away. Why? Because we used to come from a place where everybody looked alike. Now we're in a place where everybody's diverse. They don't all. Over time, those things will change. So here we're kind of saying, like, what will the average American look like in 100 years? Like a multi-racial, multicultural hybrid. Dominant man, right? And then we're like, oh, what would the Chinese look like in 100 years? They'll look like Chinese. Because they don't have as much diversity in the environment, right? So there's no need to change the genetic code. But for us, All right, and then we have polygenic traits, personal traits or physical properties that are influenced by many genes working in combination. But sometimes, anyone here feel that you don't look like neither your mom and dad? Right? Sometimes there are people be like, hey, I look more like grandfather or some random uncle, right? Or something else. Usually they could be like, hey, there's just a combination of a few things happening with the genes, and that might express itself. Now, the first class, I think I mentioned things like epigenetics, and we were like, hey, these genes are permanent. Your eye color is not going to change randomly one day, right? Your hair is not going to change texture randomly. You'll age, right? And that itself might degrade the cells and hair turn gray and all this different things. It's just not a random change. But sometimes, like with epigenetics, you're like, hey, things in the environment can change the expression of certain genes that were asleep or dormant, as we call it. So, for example, I had a sister who became schizophrenic at like 40 something years old. Right? Started hearing voices. Right before that, you say 30 something years of being with your sister, everything appears to be relatively normal. That's a long time. And then randomly started hearing voices. And then it got worse and worse and worse and worse. Right? She passed away a few years back. And you're like, what happened? How could that just come out in the brain? Random voices. So usually, like, that kind of does with epigenetics, which means depending on what's happening in your environment, certain gene may awaken itself or turn it on to some degree. You can say how drugs, alcohol, any chemicals you put into your body could potentially trigger a gene to come on. Right? That's why it's always good to know your family history. Like, hey, your grandfather was hooked on cocaine. Thanks, mom and dad, for letting me know. Maybe I should never take cocaine. Maybe alcohol is okay, but that cocaine will probably kill me. Maybe the alcohol won't kill me. Maybe cigarettes won't kill me. Thanks for letting me know that cocaine, right? Stay away from that compound. It may awaken something, right? Where you become extremely addicted. All right, influence of heredity, maturation, physical growth and development of the body, brain, nervous system. Right? Like, hey, we all want to evolve in a healthy way. Some of us may have not evolved in a healthy way as children. Like, hey, that kid is behind. Behind how? It's smaller than everybody. Why? Like, is he getting enough nutrition? Because it should be at a benchmark, right, of his peers. It appears to be anxious. Why is that kid so anxious? Something happened with the environment, right? And that's a concern. We want to have good, healthy physical growth for the brain and the nervous system. Things come in sequences. Things where genetic instructions come on. One day you are in 6th grade, just having fun. Next day body's changing to puberty. Like, whoa, puberty got turned on. The genetic sequence to start making my body change for hair, reproductive system, all this sorts of growth hormones, right? It got turned on because of the sequence, right? And some instructions to influence the body and mind. And now you can essentially become almost a different person. All right, so we want to kind of understand that, hey, are children ready or have readiness? Because once again, we say if it doesn't happen in a natural, healthy way, it'll lead to challenges as an adult. So readiness. Walking at a certain sequence. Toilet training at a certain sequence. Remember going back to Freud with those psychosexual status? Freud said if anything happens with, who remember what I said? Freud said if anything happened during his potty training, what could potentially happen to that person? Anyone remembers? Remember said Freud he could tie in that criminality and potty training. So you could go to the prison, look at all the criminals, murderers, thieves, rapists, with it, you'll have type A personality. You'll be anxious about everything that's going to be the perfect way. You got taught potty training way too early. Unhealthily early. It's not like early was awesome, right? It's too early. Now you are anal, is what it says. Oh, man, a person really anal. What do you mean? It has to be this way. It's not that way. They have to design it. You got to be perfect. Put my chair right there. Put my laptop. Right? It's out of place. And then he says opposite. You talk too late, you become anal expulsive. You are messy. Your room is messy. Your brain is messy. You can't keep schedules. Even your whole social environment is messy. Potentially, you don't follow rules. You break rules. You're not in jail. So all that from potty training, yeah, first of all, he will live that. Right? As well as the other stages we talked about. And environment, nurture, some of all external conditions that affect the person, especially the effects of learning, right? Prenatal, once again we say, hey, environment is in mom's womb, in mom's stomach, what's going on, right? Is mom stressed out because of her external environment? Then she's stressed, that produces a hormone called cortisol, right? Kind of a stress hormone, there's others as well too. Be like, what does that do to the baby if mom is chronically stressed? Remember we said with stress, it activates that fight or flight. It means there's a threat. So anyone here stressed right now? Raise your hand if you have stress. Right? So think of this concept. With stress, it's in your mind, but it's producing a hormone, cortisol, to anticipation of a threat. Fight or flight. It means if you're constantly in flight mode, like there's a threat coming tomorrow, because I gotta pay my bills, and I gotta do that homework, and I got an exam, and I got a quiz. You're constantly shooting your body full of that hormone cortisol, which have many of the organs so that they cannot be good. That cannot be good. Now, if you are pregnant with a child, that cannot be good for the baby. Something that happens. So there can be things like, you know, what's going on in the environment in the womb, like such as congenital problems, some sort of defect that occurs prenatally, like birth defect, that's the common call. And genetic disorders, problems caused by parenting characteristics, like cystic fibrosis, right? Like, there's nothing that's not really the environment that causes it, just mom or dad's genetic code. You have something bad that carries over, and now baby has it. But which is good to kind of know the history. Like, hey, mom, is cancer running in our family? If so, what kind? I just want to be prepared to know. Because potentially it could either happen to you or your child. Like, man, what runs in our family? That's good, that's kind of good to know. You can kind of get things earlier. Than you should. All right, teratogens, right? Now, anything capable of directly causing birth events, such as chemicals, right? Like, so chemicals can cause birth events, narcotics, right? Extreme, like heavy drugs, Schedule I drugs, meth, right? Heroin, cocaine. Some of my favorite drugs, just pick the singles. No, my favorite drug is caffeine. Right? Yeah. Remember every morning I go to Dunkin' Donuts and I talk to my drug dealer and I say, I need my drug. So it'll wake me up. I say, well, here's your caffeine, Dr. Ross. Like, man, this is legal? Like, yeah, it is. Most widely used drug on the planet. Right? Like, well, does it do the same thing as cocaine? Yeah, the way it does. It either stops something producing in your brain and those neurons, or it stimulates something. Here we say it kind of does both. Right? Caffeine binds to those receptors and block things like serotonin, which helps you relax or go to sleep. Right? So that's why you're awake. Right? It's blocking things to just keep you awake all night. Sometimes they have an adverse effect. They go back to still sleep as well. Depends on your chemistry.
FA is only for people who have heavy alcohol
alcohol syndrome, yeah. This is a little bit different. These are a little bit different, because they cause very obvious, like these can cause a bunch of cognitive issues, like debilitating mental issues, right? But like here, you might see some very obvious physical issues with fetal alcohol syndrome. Right, usually they recommend, hey mom, you can drink 1 glass of wine a day, no more than that, right? Obviously it's better if you don't drink any, right? But, someone can have a glass of wine, just one a day, right? They also too want to limit too on caffeine as well too. Caffeine can have effects on the child. Okay, so with fetal alcohol syndrome, what you usually see is a very thin upper lip on the baby child. Sometimes the ears are disproportionate. Like one ear's high, one's low. One eye's high, one eye's low. You can clearly see it physically, like there's almost a facial deformity when it comes to fetal alcohol syndrome. Right, as well as other things, emotional behavior, mental, and all right, we get different sensitive periods, things at times where we're very vulnerable, particularly like prenatally while we're in mom's womb, right? But there's other times. Early experiences that have long-lasting effects because of our sensitivity. And we'll kind of talk about that, like emotional things and bonding things, right? Was mom or dad were they very anxious with you? Were they overbearing with you as a baby? That can have a long-term effect. Were they dismissive of you, just let you cry for hours? Long-term effects again, right? They give you proper nutrition, or you malnourished, long-term effects. Right? You might be small, you might not grow up to be healthy. Right? And emotional things for us that we can think about. Like, man, are you easily triggered? What type of thing do this? Are you easily angered? Are you easily stressed out or impulsive? To react on this? Deprivation and enrichment, right? We say, hey, deprivation is lack of normal stimulation, nutrition, comfort, or love. Were you deprived of love? Part of love that's really important that nature gave to us is physical touch. So think about this. If you weren't hugged and kissed as a baby, usually it has a long-lasting impact on how you will interact with other people in potentially intimate relationships. You may say, I don't want to be touched. I don't like to be touched. Why? Because I didn't receive that from mom and dad. I was deprived. Enrichment, when an environment is deliberately made more complex and intellectually stimulating and emotionally supportive. So it's like, hey, if you have a small child, I wonder if you could let obstacles on the floor for the baby to crawl and pick things up and look at it and figure out puzzles and challenges and let it fall once in a while. It has to learn as well too. Or do you have an environment where there's really nothing there? Maybe just sit in the chair all day. Like, that's not a rich environment. Rich environments where babies active, right? We can see the difference in the brain in rats from enriched environments. Does the baby have anybody to communicate? Does the infant toddler have anybody to communicate with? Let me see if I can pull up an illustration. Here we go. Okay, so with the rats, we say, we talked about this, I think, last class or the first week. Then we say, hey, you know what? Who faces more depression? People on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, who just go on there to watch and observe, right? Voyeurism, just want to watch everything, but don't participate, right? You don't post anything, or people who post, right? Studies have come to find out that the people who just watch have higher rates of depression. They don't participate. They're just fans in the sidelines watching the game. And there's people actually playing the game. he also said too, social isolation is not important. So the isolated billionaire, let's say you got $1 billion, you have everything you need. There's a castle somewhere, but you're by yourself. Usually that person will die an early death. By household, they have everything. They have all the food, cars, private jet. Because you need social interaction in order to adapt and thrive. That's been proven over and over again. We're social beings, social animals. And it impacts our neurons. Remember that new connection stuff make us so wonderful in our thoughts? So here we'll give an example from Rosenzweig invented in 1972. We say, hey, here is a rat in an impoverished environment. Impoverished means like, hey, you got food and water and you have shelter. That's it. You're going to live for a while because you're able to eat, sleep, drink, you have energy. And then we look at his brain cells, right? Those neurons. And then we go ahead and compare it to these rats. But when these rats not only got food, water, shelter, they have other rats to interact with and learn from and communicate with. Not only that, they got obstacles and challenges. So here's a little ladder. Here's the thing what you call it. I wonder if I can jump off what'll happen. A lot of stuff for your brain to make sense of so that you are able to grow and develop. And you look at the comparison between the brain cells and neurons. Way more branches, right? Way more of a neural network. Better brain, a more complex brain. So all of that to say is, guess what? Challenges are good. Nobody wants to get up and come to school, right? No one wants to go get a degree, it takes too long. No one wants to go to work. No one wants to do anything that they don't have to, right? Human beings have a tendency to use proclivity to be lazy. We prefer convenience and comfort over everything. Also know that doesn't make the brain better. So if you're wondering like, oh man, I'm not getting ahead of all this, because in order to do that, you need deliberate discomfort. You gotta be uncomfortable on purpose. All the stuff you don't want to do. Like nobody wants to get up and do push-ups. No one wants to get up and go jog when it's so cold outside. But the people who do it are enriching their brain. They're actually creating new networks. And they're gonna rise above everyone else who's not doing the stuff because they don't feel like it. Right, so think about that. You have to usually all this question like, man, I'm not getting ahead. Ask yourself, am I being uncomfortable on purpose? You're like, no, I like comfort, just chilling. Right? There's your answer. Chilling doesn't make this. Chilling makes this. Right? Doing a bunch of stuff makes this. Interacting, talking, networking, challenges, obstacles. It breeds a more healthy, complex brain. Okay? And it motivates you. So, if I would say try to practice as much as you can, like anything you don't want to do, it's like, I don't want to do that. Train your brain better and do it anyway. I like doing things that are uncomfortable on purpose. I like it to be uncomfortable. Right? Push yourself. Anyone know David Goggins, like a former military guy, right? Okay, that's what I'm talking about, right? Deliberate discomfort, right? Jogging 20 miles.
That's a different level.
Yeah, different level, right? Like he's way up here, right? Former Navy SEAL, all those things. But the message is still the same. You know, it's like the more you push yourself to do things, who wants to do this? The more the better off you are. Like you might be able to do anything, and then everybody else will just chill and like comfort all the time. You're just gonna stay there at the level. That's what it's gonna be. Okay? So yes, push yourself. You like part of this is social interaction. Some people are like introvert, and I get it. You're a bit introvert, a bit standoffish. Takes you a little bit of time to get comfortable. But even that's a challenge, and that's a challenge that you should actually override. Like, I don't like talking. Do it anyway. So that you can increase your network for more success. Somebody might have a job opportunity, an investor, something you never know. But if you don't push yourself, and like, I like not talking because I'm All right, temperament. Right? We say temperament, inherited physical core of personality. Right? Your core of your personality. Remember we said with personality we can quickly use the model ocean to address people's core personality. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neurotic. How open are you? High or low? How conscientious are you with yourself and others? High or low? How extroverted you are? High or low? You're low or introverted? Or more introverted? Agreeability, your preference for social harmony. You don't know how to say no to people because you're high on agreeability. Yeah to everything because you don't like, you prefer social harmony and not shaking people. Right? And neuroticism. Neuroticism is like you get a negative expectation for future events. Call a neurotic person, guess what they say? Hey, I'm taking a trip to Spain. No, I wouldn't do that. It's dangerous. The plane could crash. Why? How much did it cost? And it's like hang on the phone with that person. You're neurotic. You're speaking from a negative viewpoint, trying to predict the future. We can't do that. Right? Just gotta go out and take the risk. Right? Risk takers go for the neurotic people who are overthinking everything so that they can try to get everything perfect because they're in fear of what will happen if they don't overthink it. Any overthinkers here? Look, the overthinkers, I asked the overthinkers, they're hesitant to raise their hand because they're overthinkers. Should I answer? Right? Even in the question of overthinking. But remember, challenge that. Like, hey, you're trying to predict future events. So you usually make them negative because you're waiting for the worst thing to happen. Because if the worst thing happens, you feel like, yeah, I knew it. I knew it was going to be bad. You like that comfort. That means sometimes self-evaluation, you kind of like go low. Right? It can impact self-worth and self-evaluation because you're expecting low things. You're not expecting wonderful, great things, which you should. Right? Even if it goes bad, it doesn't happen all the time. Okay, temperament. Hey, generic study here. They said that 40% of children are easy, relaxed, and agreeable. Right? So you're looking at a classroom and you do a study on the class and say 40% of the people in, say, children's classroom, they're like, hey, they're easy, they're relaxed, and they follow rules, agreeable. Like, hey, the school has rules. Listen to the teacher. Do their show up on time. Sit down in your chair. Don't make noise. Don't disturb. 40%. Difficult children, right? They're moody. They're intense, easily angered. And then slow to warm up children, right? They're a little bit hesitant. They're restrained. They're quiet until they get comfortable. They don't ask more questions. It takes them a long time to get comfortable. A little bit unexpressive. They don't want to show emotions too much. Or be described as shy. Right? And then a remainder say, do not fit into any specific category. So what do you think you were growing up? The feedback that you received from others, parents, your peers, your family, people in the community. What do you think? Who here was an easy child? Relaxed and agreeable. Agree with the rules, follow the rules, and pretty chill. Raise your hand. Relax. All right, who here was difficult? Why do you think that's the case? Parents? Hard-headed? And who here was slow to warm up? We're like, hey, it takes me time to get adjusted. I don't trust a lot of people. I don't want it. You gotta know. You're slow to warm up. And do you feel that you're the same now? Or things have changed? Who here feels that they changed since they were kids with these temperaments? And how so? How do you feel? In what way?
Mature, I should say.
Yeah. No, usually normally boys very energetic, very hard-headed, and then they kind of grow out of it, right? If they still have a healthy environment, they kind of grow out of it and become mature, right? The ones who have an unhealthy environment, you know, they stay like that, right? You get in a lot of trouble. Where was I? I don't think I was. I don't know. I probably didn't finish this. I was like one of the worst kids growing up. I was a troll, a bully, but I was always purely psychological. So I'll be honest, like I haven't changed much since like I was 6 years old. I don't probably could talk to class at 6 because I grew up the youngest of 11 kids, and I was very aware of human behavior, body language, people's insecurities, how to spot vulnerabilities, triggers, right? So as a kid, I would kind of maybe trigger people all the time, until they like get mad or something like that, or like real bad one. But I changed those things, made them negative into positive, right? I went to like 13 elementary schools. So one thing I did have was openness. I was able to talk with anybody from anywhere, and that kind of helped me to use that negative behavior into something positive, helping people, therapy, all that stuff that I did. Right? So you can't change it. You can't change that environment. Probably didn't help too that I was the youngest of 11 kids. So it's probably a little bit of that like spoiled, I can get away with anything, right? My big brothers and sisters protecting things. So that was our environment. Alright, some other examples of temperament. An easy child would encourage positive parenting. A difficult child may make parents more negative. So they kind of impact both. You have a difficult child, you know, it can make parents give them a hard time. Now they're not even positive about you anymore, right? But parental reactions in turn can make an easy child easier or difficult more difficult. Which means as a parent, you still have to override your grievances, your anxieties with the kid. You still have to work with them to try to change together. Newborns, neonates, right? Neonates, newborns, are very responsive at birth with sensory capacities that are rapidly mature. So babies are born with reflexes. They're born with actual actionable information. So if you took a baby, let's say even as a guy, you took a baby, put the baby on the church, you're like, oh, little cute baby, the baby will try to breastfeed on you immediately. That's its reflex for its own survival to go for food. It needs food constantly. Another reflex, they have grasping reflexes. So here we can look at a few. Grasping, so babies have really strong grips, extremely strong. You could give a baby your finger and they'll hold on, you literally lift the baby up. That's how strong it is. Almost like primate, a monkey, like being able to like swing from a branch. That strong, right? And it probably is rooted evolutionarily for that purpose, right? Or in some ways, to hold things, or to learn things to grow, right? Pick up things to look at it and learn, so to move to the next stage of development, or to hold things to feed, potentially feed itself at some point. And that's the rooting reflex. So the rooting reflex is lightly touch the infant's cheek, and they'll turn the object of attention nervous. Right? Interesting fact, men also have the capacity to breastfeed. Men can produce like a small amount of breast milk. Side note. Okay, they have the sucking reflex. Touch an object or nipple to the infant's mouth, and they'll make a rhythmic sucking movement. So babies, the way that babies suck is different than the way we would like we had a sucker in our mouth, right? We just kind of use suction to like squeeze things out. Like baby actually like clamp on with their mouth, right? Yes. Yes. the start of it, right? So we want to keep things quiet, some white noise, background noise, not really hear people talking too much or shuffling around. Yeah, babies, you could YouTube that or something to see a moral reflex. Babies just shoot out his arms like he's trying to give you a hug. Right, and then early motor development, we got increased muscular control occurs in patterns, right? So the pattern will usually be cephalocauda, like the most important movement first is head to foot, very linear and straight. Right, that's the most important thing, to be able to move your head and to be able to like move your legs to be able to walk. Right? Usually you'll see those patterns first from the infant. And then secondary, like, well, it's also important to use arms and lateral movements spreading out. You gotta balance yourself, you gotta grab things, you gotta move. Right? So first kind of development is that cephalocauda, head to toe. Proximal distal means kind of spreading out, right? Extremities, legs, arms, right? Learning how to balance. So, all right, newborns are mimics. Remember we talked about the brain and behavior. We say with those neurons, human beings have a ton of mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons usually take in information that it observes of human behavior and says, ooh, I should do that. I should do it just like that. An observational learning, right? And God usually calls in fact that baby, let's say, or individuals see something like, oh, that person failed and hurt themselves because of that. Maybe I shouldn't do that. That's another form of learning because we have that brain, those mirror neurons. We're used to mimic, right? So babies can easily mimic our behaviors. You do a face to the baby, your baby tries to replicate it. You make a sound, baby tries to do it, move your mouth, something like baby tries to do the same thing. Because they're not able to do that complex learning that we talked about, like operant learning, yes, right? Or classical learning, which we'll talk about most of it. All right, and then we'll do a group kind of discussion on attachment styles. So, attachment is really, really strongly linked to adult behavior because of its childhood pattern. So, your early social development is extremely important because it's rooted in emotional attachment to primary caregivers and need for physical contact. Right? To build bonds. So you're like, hey, how do you bond with people? Right? Like, do you have healthy bonds with people? Do you have unhealthy people? Avoid people? Do you not like to touch? Are you a clinger? You cling on to people? Are you so emotionally responsive? Somebody goes you, now your world is over. Right? All these types of things you kind of like is rooted in the early social development. And we'll kind of see how. Right? So we say emotional attachment, close emotional bond that infants form with their parents, caregivers, or others. Usually who's ever in their house. Uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, whoever's there, right? In that environment. And then touch is important. Human beings are meant to bond through touching. So, anyone ever been here during childbirth? Like a sibling or anything? No. Right, so kind of first thing they do, if dad is present in the room, mom gives birth to the baby. And what's the first thing they do with the baby and dad? Who knows?
They give the baby to the mom for skin to skin.
Yeah, and dad, right? It's important, right? Because you're like, baby should bond first time in the world immediately with parents. And that can't be done through texting and calling. It has to be done physically through touch. So first thing they do, they'll give it to mom and then they pass it off and give it to dad. And dad just gets skin contact. Dad will lay there with the baby for some hours. Building a bond. And then you say, how does it bond? Well, there's those pheromones we talked about, hormones, energy, And if progressively you're not given those bonds, guess what? You do not trust people because you couldn't trust your caregivers and family. And now you're distant from other human beings as an adult. All right, a sure sign of emotional attachment is separation anxiety, right? Crying inside the fear when a child is left alone or is with a stranger generally appears around 8 to 12 months. Observation of baby, like, oh man, when mom goes away or dad goes away from baby, baby just goes berserk. It constantly needs the presence of mom and dad in an unhealthy way. Like it's getting anxiety when it doesn't see mom and dad or a familiar face. Right? So it's important kind of to have the same people show up to the house, not too many strangers. So say, you know, if someone hit the babysit, you're like, you should probably babysit using the same person. That baby doesn't have separation anxiety, it sees a familiar face, not random faces. Right? It should be seeing similar faces, because babies can recognize quickly. And that's why, you know, some people who aren't around as much, like, why does the baby cry when I pick up? You're a stranger. You don't like it. Now, some people it carries on and can develop into a disorder, right? Separation from parents or caregivers who have a high degree of stress. Anyone here has separation anxiety when they're not able to get communication with mom and dad. Sometimes it's carried over to other relationships. Remember we said clingers, super clingy. That person hasn't texted in a couple hours, the person will text you or call you, right? Because they got a busy life, you have anxiety. What are we doing? Where we at? How can we get from you? Right? Alright, and then attachment styles. We all have different attachment styles based on how we were raised. Right? Some of us have secure attachment styles. Mom gave us enough love, we got hugs and kisses in a healthy way. They let us make mistakes, right? They guided us, but they didn't do it for us and make us dependent on them, right? Which would be bad, and we'll be dependent on them forever. Right? We can't do things as independent human beings. That will be secure, right? Things are pretty stable in a positive emotional bond. They'll let you just sit there and cry for hours, give your baby, give you stuff to play with, normal. And then this insecure avoidant, anxious emotional bond, tendency to avoid reunion with parent or caregiver. This means, guess what? Maybe mom or dad or whoever's the caregiver will leave too much that we don't want to expect back. They weren't there enough. So in our brain, as children, we're probably like, you know what? I don't expect them to be there anymore. Matter of fact, I don't expect anybody to be there for me at all. I'm an independent person. It's all on me. The world can't be trusted. People will not be there. Why? Because this mom and dad is not there. Whatever. Right? Maybe left the room, let you cry for hours because they're asleep, tired, out loud. For all sorts of reasons. You know, life is hectic. Maybe they're trying to pay bills, work 2-3 jobs, I don't know. Right? But regardless, we're like, that can produce insecure, avoidant attachment styles. And now you have that with other people. You will avoid reunion with other people. And you're anxious about it. Right? Let's say they try to get too close and like, it gives me anxiety. Insecure, ambivalent, anxious emotional bond, desire to be with the parent or caregiver, and some resistance to being reunited with the mother. So here we're kind of like, you're anxious, but you're clingy. Okay? But you're kind of like, you're clingy, person will be kind of going, well, this will kind of be just, people who are standoffish all together, but you can kind of clearly see they don't want to build a bond or anything like that. Very different. And the other ones are more chaotic. I would really say that the one insecure villain is more toxic, dramatic bonding. So you know, have you ever heard of trauma bonding, and people can bond through trauma? Right? Raise your hand if you heard of trauma bonding. Right? You're like, hey, two toxic people get together, fight, break up every day, argue all the time. You're like, what happened? Like they were raised like that. They're just carrying on the behavior as adults. They're probably both this. Both insecure, who you looking at, who you talking to, both doing that. Right? And just random. So let me ask you, if you can think back to your own upbringing and maybe the feedback and maybe even your current style, which one do you think you are? Secure, insecure, avoidant, or insecure and ambivalent in terms of your attachment styles to people in general? We'll talk about this in our group. So, I guess YouTube, when she comes back, we get a group. YouTube. Okay. I'll give you a couple minutes. Talk about what your attachment styles are and where do you think they came from? Right? Where do you think they came from? Using feedback that others give you. I'm pretty sure people have given you some feedback about your attachments. I'd say mine stabled out later in life, became more secure, but mine was probably maybe insecure and ambivalent. And the reason why, I told you, I went to 13 elementary schools, right? Which means that usually I was a new kid. So it allowed me to root myself in like strong, long-term friendships. People were like, oh man, I got that person since first grade, right? So my first girlfriend went down and that's Mike. Right? So I was always new. But the positive things was it allowed me to talk to anybody. Kind of allowed me to be who I am now, right? I can talk to anybody. No problem with communication or anxiety with talking. But it did kind of create me to be a passerby. Relationships, all that type of stuff, just passing through. Because really that's the environment that I grew up in. Now it changed later in life, more stable, right? So it can be altered later, right? Doesn't have to be altered. But yeah, tell us about, discuss your attachment styles. Okay, thoughts? What were your thoughts? Your intentions? Well, what kind of environment do you grow up in? One that was maybe more stable, or one where you're kind of anxious, kind of distant with your parents? This one? In Midland? All right, so in Midland. Okay, what were you thinking? This one. What were your thoughts? And why would that be? Yeah, think about that. A lot of this has to deal with trust. If you couldn't trust your parents to be there in the first place, and they didn't give it to you when you really needed it, usually it continues on. And in the sense that maybe sometimes, if there's a lack of trust, and a lot of times it can even develop into sociopathy, sociopaths. Like what? Where did these sociopaths come from? Sometimes there's a lack of care about other people or anyone. Not to say, your example, I'm just using extreme examples. Sometimes there's an actual lack of care because you're being received the care. So now you're like, I don't care. So you go look out in the world and see people doing all types of things without care in the world. That's risky, right? A lot of times this environment, which is different than psychopaths, because psychopaths are genetic. Sociopaths nurture, right? Sociopaths potentially be changed. Psychopaths can be changed. They're amygdala, which is different. Part of their brain that activates fight or flight is different than normal, which means they don't have fever. They also don't have stress. They're useful in society, but different. What were your thoughts back here?
Secure attachment, because I feel like I've gotten help throughout my life, like not just like with my parents, my brothers and sisters, and they felt like compassion towards me,
Yeah.
and I also like feel compassion towards them, like being able to like communicate my feelings and express myself.
That's good. All right, so you're like, hey, secure because we had good support. Siblings, parents, so you get good emotional support and other support. What about here?
Secure because I guess the environment was I had a lot of support and mostly religion, but I learned to be more compassionate.
That's good. Support can come from the entire community. It don't always have to come from the family. Right? So like religious beliefs and memberships within a religious organization, very helpful. What were your thoughts? This one here? Okay. Early attention. All right. So,
I was thinking externally,
okay, why would that be?
because when I was a kid, I grew up very independent. So now I feel like it takes me longer to
Like, it doesn't, not all the time does it have to be, hey, I was raised in XYZ environment, and it's gonna really impact me in a negative way. Because there's other things we'll talk about, like resilience. Some children are born with traits that can override any challenge that you give them. So no matter where they grew up at, what difficulties they face, they're almost predestined to like overcome obstacles. Right? That's their core strength. So not all the time will growing up in a bad environment lead to having, you know, maybe bad behavior or some negative behaviors. Right? Because there are things like resiliency. All right, different type of parenting styles, right? So we just talked about attachment styles from the children, parenting styles, and we can talk about this. Hey, there's different type of parenting styles. Some are authoritarian, right? They enforce rigid rules and demand strict obedience to authority, which means, hey, follow my rules. We don't really allow to come up with all your thoughts of things you want to do, people you want to hang out with. Like, no, the rules are the rules. You follow. So children tend to be emotionally stiff and lacking in curiosity. They kind of have television. This is how things are done, because this is what my mom and dad taught me. I can't deviate from this. These are the rules. I follow. Right? Sometimes it lacks help people lack in creativity. Especially like with creativity, you have a very open mind. Sometimes the rules should be broken. Right? Like, why do we have these rules in the first place? We ask creative questions. Question everything. Overly permissive parents give little guidance. Let you stay out all night as a 13-year-old, right? Coming in late in the house, watch all the television, right? Play all the video games. Allow too much freedom or don't hold children accountable for their actions. So negative two. Children tend to be dependent and immature, frequently misbehave. Right? So like, man, that person's extremely immature. Why? Because your parents, you're spoiled. They were very permissible, allowed you to do anything that you wanted to do. Right? And that's not healthy. And now you tend when that immaturity, you tend to be still dependent on that. And then authoritative, which is different than authoritarian parents. Authoritative, say they provide firm and consistent guidance combined with love and affection. They do have rules in which to follow, but they guide you. They don't like strictly enforce it. They don't force you. Right? Children be confident, self-controlled, independent, and assertive. So maybe the most healthiest version would be authoritative. Obviously, you want the parents to guide you, but you don't want them to force you to do things. You still want to have your own independent thought on things, right? And even your kid. Okay, so quickly, before we get out of here, what kind of parents do you think you had? Authoritarian, right? Rigid rules, demand strict obedience. Permissive, allow you to play video games and do whatever you want to do when you want to do it. Or authoritative, like gave you, firm rules, but there's flexibility. Right? That also allows you to be to yourself. What do you think? Authoritarian, raise your hand. If you grew up in a strict household, has it changed? It's still the same. So how do you combat that? Do you challenge that with your parents? Like, no, I want to do this, and you get moving. Okay, anyone else authoritarian? So how do you handle that now?
I think, because I have older siblings, so the confidence for that is up to like a parents like that older and
Alright, so your parents gave up. And who had overly permissive parents? Like really allowed you to do a lot of things. How has that impacted you now?
In good ways.
In good
I
ways.
have much freedom, but like I feel like they're protective as well.
Okay.
A little bit of both.
Love that. So maybe authoritarian.
Yeah.
Authoritative, I would say. Authoritative. Who had authoritative parents? Like we gave you good guidance, allowed you to kind of be. Alright. Yeah, I have overly permissive parents. They kind of like who just day, I'll see you on Tuesday, but I wanna talk on Tuesday about, we may have a quiz to cover the first, 4 chapters.